Well, I'll start things off. I want to thank everyone for attending what is our first sports gambling education webinar, webinar number 1 regarding sports gambling and sponsorships. Just really quickly, my name is Scott Shelton. If you've taken the first course, you saw me interview Sarah Slane in our 360 awareness course. Before we start things off, I want to just thank everyone for joining today. The first things I'd like to thank our folks at OU, especially Matt Casciato and Jim Kahler, who will be hosting today's event, for their support and really driving this important course. And next, I'd like to thank the people at US Integrity. That includes Matt Holt, Scott Sadin, and Steve Pastorino. Steve, who was kind enough to be one of our esteemed panelists today. And then finally, my Sienna team who have worked with me to really produce a really strong course here for not only back in April or May when we launched that first one, but also the second course that launched just this morning at sportsgamblingeducation.com. Just for attending today's webinar, anyone that attends this webinar can use the discount code WEB715. That's for today's webinar here on July 15th for 25% off any course that is available for purchase, or also the course bundle. So that is valid to the end of this month, July, at sportsgamblingeducation.com. So I want to turn things over to today's host. That is Jim Kahler. Jim is the Director of Sports Gambling Education at Ohio University, and he's an Ohio University alumnus who returned to his alma mater as the Executive Director of the Center for Sports Administration back in December of 2005, after developing successful collegiate and corporate programs at Arizona State University, Riverfront Coliseum, the St. Louis Arena, and with the Cleveland Cavaliers. So Jim is one of the only sports business professionals in the country who has over 20 years practical experience in the field and over 10 years of experience in academia as well. So we're excited and grateful to have him not only leading this program, but he also leads a number of discussions in this second course with Mike Hamrick, the athletic director at Marshall, and John Steinbrecher, the commissioner of the MAC conference. So Jim, I'm going to turn things over to you.
Thanks, Scott, and thanks for setting up today's webinar and your entire team here at Sienna. So it's my pleasure today to really introduce you to some good friends that I have known and am getting to know as we move down this vertical of sports gambling and sports gambling education. But I want to start out with a bobcat in Sarah Slane. Sarah is the founder of Slane Advisory, and she's got over 12 years of experience now working in the gaming, casino, sports, gambling vertical, and most recently was the senior vice president with the American Gaming Association's thing as the head of public affairs. Sarah, welcome to the webinar.
Thank you. Go Bobcats.
Next, I want to introduce someone that I have known going back to my days at Arizona State, but Bill King is a senior writer with the Sports Business Journal, and in my humble opinion, probably does as good a job as anyone following what's going on with sports gambling and all areas in and around it. So Bill, welcome to the webinar.
Thank you, Jim, and that was kind words. Thank you.
And then last but not least, Steve Pastorino. I got to know Steve through the National Sports Forum years ago, and he has a long career with the Oakland A's, Real Salt Lake, Chicago Fire, and most recently the Las Vegas Lights. And today is the head of sales and business development with US Integrity, one of our partners on the course. So Steve, welcome to the webinar.
Thanks, Jim. Happy to be with everybody, and I keep finding myself pulled back to sponsorship. Love deal making, love working with partners, love finding common ground, and happy to share what I know. And I've got this unique perspective now at US Integrity where we're seeing both sides of lots of deals, and looking forward to sharing some insights about it.
Good deal. So we'll go ahead and get started with our first question. But the goal with this webinar was to attract individuals that will be dealing with sponsorships in sports gambling. So the first question, and I'm going to start with Bill. Bill, who do you see as the major players in the category of sports gambling sponsorship, and what sets them apart?
Because if you're talking about on the brand side, on the sportsbook side, it's thus far it's been the story of the daily fantasy legacy brands. It's been DraftKings and it's been FanDuel, and I think that's largely because they had both brand recognition, nationally. So in every state that rolled out, they had brand recognition. Sorry, you just jumped off my screen for a second, but you're back. So they had brand recognition. And then, I think there was an expectation that you would see the land-based casinos, the MGMs, the Caesars, those brands that we all know so well. They haven't done as well because it really has been about having that existing customer base that you could then roll over and having brand recognition. So, I mean, until we see any indication of a change, those have been the two dominant players. I think that's going to shake out, and it's going to vary state by state, but it's clear they had a huge advantage because, again, they not only had brand recognition, but they had people who had given them their credit card numbers. They had a sense of trust. In an industry, in a business where I'm saying I'm going to place this bet and I would like to be paid at some point, people had a good experience already. And so I think those have been the leaders.
And then, Sarah, I want to pivot on that question when we're talking about the players, maybe go over the pond to Europe, because I know you keep your eye on, players over there working their way to the United States. So who might, if DraftKings and FanDuel's are the dominance, who are the emerging players in your mind?
Yeah, I think, as Bill said, I mean, obviously those two operators, DraftKings and FanDuel, had a leg up on everyone else because they were advertising during the daily fantasy boom. And the traditional casino operators were left on the sidelines, not because they didn't want to partake in daily fantasy sports, but because the states had deemed it as illegal. And so they were not able to then participate in something that was in a gray area, and at that time, in some states deemed to be an illegal activity. So they really did start off in a deficit. You've seen now, I think, probably 5 or 6 major brands, and I think that we're going to start to see more and more name recognition associated with them. PointsBet is an Australian-based company. They're definitely starting to make a big splash. They just announced a deal with the Detroit Tigers. I think Betfred was another one. They're getting very aggressive now in this space. They announced a deal with the Broncos a few weeks ago. The likes of MGM, I think that they'll continue, to start to really put some money behind sponsorship and advertising. William Hill is the partner of Caesars. There's been some transactional issues that have been happening there. So expect that as those deals, that transaction closes, that you'll start to see more from William Hill. But it's going to be a really, really tough go, honestly. I think the die at this point has been cast. There are definitely market leaders in this space. And so I think the challenge now becomes what happened or what's been happening for the past year. That old saying that what got you here isn't going to get you to the next place. I think that that's absolutely going to hold true now in sponsorship. And I think you're going to start to see the more dominant operators saying no to a lot of sponsorship opportunities unless it's incredibly compelling for them to put the money behind it.
Okay. And then, Steve, I know living in Las Vegas, you probably were one of the first teams ever to do a deal with the Las Vegas Lights and in sports gambling. Are you seeing any emerging players coming out of the Vegas market, or have we pretty much covered the group?
Well, we timed our initial partnership at Las Vegas Lights with William Hill. We launched in April of 2018, so 1 month before PASPA. We were ahead of the curve. I was fortunate enough to work for an ownership group and for a league that was open to the idea of a sportsbook doing a team sponsorship. And the most difficult thing I think we'll discuss today is that we have 50 states plus the district in Puerto Rico with 52 different sets of regulations and where they are in the vetting process. You have ownership groups that at the team level and at the league level that have varying opinions on the industry of sports betting. So there's no one size fits all. That being said, Betfred, which has its U.S. operations headquartered here in Las Vegas, made a very high-profile partnership announcement with the Denver Broncos 2 weeks ago. Everyone in the UK knows Betfred. Nobody in North America has ever heard of Betfred before 2 weeks ago. And so they have to decide where deals make sense. Right now, Betfred is only legally licensed in 3 states, I believe, Pennsylvania, Iowa, and Colorado. And so you can't really look at national platforms of sponsorship when you can't operate in 47 of the 50 states where your marketing dollars are going to go via television, digital media, et cetera. So it's a really tricky time for the operators to measure the landscape because you're looking at 50 different deals. I don't know if we'll see a Golden Nugget or Station Casinos or Boyd Gaming, which are 3 legacy Las Vegas casinos that have sports books that are starting to roll out and actually become players. But time will tell.
Okay. And you touched on something that we were going to get to sooner or later, that one size doesn't fit all. So this next question, I'm going to start with Sarah. If you're a team owner, what type of legislation would you want to see in your home state if sports gambling hasn't been adopted yet? Because there seems to be different rules and laws in every state. So optimistically, let's say you own a professional football team, baseball team, basketball team. What's on your wish list for the legislation in the state if everything hasn't been passed yet?
At this point, I would say you would want to have a license, honestly. I mean, you would want to have a license then that you could go sub-license out to an operator. We've seen this now in a couple different jurisdictions, be it Washington, D.C., Chicago, now with the Cubs having one. I do think that we're going to continue to see that trend emerge, especially now in light of COVID and there being, a huge amount of budget holes that are going to have to be filled, certainly from professional sports not being able to be up and running. So market access is king. Every operator is going to want to get into the market somehow. We've seen this in New Jersey. It's gotten far more competitive, just a ton more action that's happening because I think some of the late sort of second stage operators that we're looking at the U.S., they're basically saying to themselves now, it's either now or never. So if we're going to get in, we have to get in now. And so I think you're going to see more competitiveness for that direct market access to enter a state if they don't already have it, be it through a brick and mortar casino or through a racetrack. So that would be one thing that I would certainly advise. And that certainly isn't a guarantee. And there's a lot that has to go into that, including being a part of the lobbying process on the front end. The second piece of this that's completely critical to actually driving revenue back to the local teams is that there has to be a good legislative and regulatory model in place that empowers the sports betting operator to thrive. If there's a high tax rate, if the licensing fee is $10 million, so I'll take Pennsylvania, for example, 36% tax rate on gross gaming revenue, a $10 million licensing fee, there's not a whole lot. This is a low margin business to begin with. You're only holding about 5% of all the bets that are taking place. So 95% of those are being given back to winners. Not a whole lot of money left over then to do big sponsorship deals in the local state. So I can't emphasize this enough. I feel like sometimes people miss the plot. The plot is that all of the action is going to take place in the legislature during those sessions, and that if you want to drive the most economic value back to your team, you really should try to be a part of that process and have a voice as those discussions emerge.
Bill, you follow that pretty closely. So do you see with future states coming on board that teams are rolling up their sleeves with their owners and getting to the table?
I think it varies. I think that there's a level of discomfort for some. I think if you looked at the first one to do it was Washington, right, where you had Ted Leonsis, who was sort of a champion of sports betting. He was very comfortable with it. He got what he wanted. And what I would argue was probably the most convoluted setup of anybody so far. But if you're him and in that building, you're sitting in a good position, right? Because you control the market, you control every bet that's placed around that area. It's not particularly consumer friendly. Because especially in a market where if you work in the district, now this is not in play now, but let's think about traditional situation. If you live in Virginia and you work in DC, if you live in Maryland and you work in DC and you commute back and forth, you've got accounts in each of those different states to bet in DC. If it's going to be outside of that arena, now you're with the Intralot app. If you're in the arena, now you're with the William Hill app, and then if you go home to Maryland and Virginia as they adopt sports betting, you've got whatever app that's in there. So if I wanted to bet while I was at work and then go home, I can't collect my bet until I go back to work. I can't then roll that money over onto another bet off a West Coast game maybe or anything like that because I'm no longer in that jurisdiction. That's a really complicated, convoluted, not very consumer-friendly apparatus. But it will generate a ton of revenue for the Wizards through the relationship with William Hill. So big plus for them, not such a great plus for consumers or the product. And we'll have to see how it works out in Illinois. So I'm a little more skeptical about that long term, I think. But I could certainly see the upside for a team.
Okay, this next question is going to go out to Steve because you've already done a deal. But moving forward, what team and property assets will these sponsors covet the most? So they're going to be throwing down large sums of sponsorships, but what will they want in return?
So John Levy of the Score Bet, speaking at the SBC Digital Summit yesterday, said that they were looking at it from three perspectives. They want to build a brand, they want to engage with fans, and that ultimately they'd be measured by the ease of use of product and the consumer usability of the product. So how can a sports team serve those purposes? Obviously, if you've got the biggest reach, and the Denver Broncos in Colorado offer a tremendous reach, they are the team for the entire Rocky Mountain area. Betfred has radio rights, they're going to have digital rights, they're going to have on-site rights, they're going to have some in-stadium, in-bowl rights as well. So they are trying to build the Betfred name on the back of the Broncos name, and Broncos Nation is massively both geographically and in terms of numbers. So any way that they can reach fans. But believe me, at the end of the day, Betfred is hoping that Broncos fans will make the choice to download the Betfred app when they bet on a Broncos game before downloading one of the other 32 different mobile licenses available in Colorado when they're all online. And so they're really tying in that if you're a Broncos fan and you see that Betfred has a high profile at Broncos games, in Broncos media, radio, social media, television, et cetera, that you're going to make that connection. You will see sportsbook operators asking for exclusive opportunities, VIP experiences, one-of-a-kind experiential marketing opportunities, whether it be lounges, pregame activities, winning merchandise, meeting your favorite player, et cetera. But at the end of the day, the Betfreds and the PointsBets of the world, they want access to the 70,000 Denver Broncos season ticket holders and the millions of Bronco Nation fans around the country.
Okay. Bill, I want to come back to you on this one, but from a best practice standpoint, what can be taken away from those teams and properties that have already entered into sports gaming sponsorships?
Story I tell all the time. When this first ramped up, I had, there were really two learning experiences, and one was covering the case itself and understanding the history and the law and what the debate really was. That was one, which was very different than what I understood it to be before I dug into it. And then the second one was the first time that I walked into the arena in Newark and sat down with Adam Davis to talk about what it was the Devils were doing. And Adam had spent the better part of a year in the lead up before the Supreme Court even overturned PASPA, looking at what will operators want from me? What can I do to drive their business? And one of the things that he understood pretty early on, and certainly after more conversation after conversation was, they were going to vary based on who he was talking to. And so you could take the category, and in an industry where so much is about exclusivity, sports betting wasn't going to be that. The casino operators in particular are used to all playing in the same space. But beyond that, William Hill is in a different business than MGM, which is in a different business than FanDuel. Now, they're all in sports betting. They're all sports books, and they may all get to the same place, but they're coming in from very different directions. And so they can all be in your building, and FanDuel can be there trying to just drive a brand connection to get people to understand that they're not just in DFS anymore, they're in sports betting. And here they are on the dashboard, and just sort of reminding people in that market of what they are. And that's about all they want out of it. And then you had Caesars, who was in the building, who really was still about getting people to Atlantic City. That was how they had used those sponsorships, those lounges, the premium spaces before. And that, at that point anyway, was still pretty much the way they were looking at it. So they were perfectly happy being in there with us as long as they had their space. And then there was William Hill, which generally, if you hear Joe Asher, the CEO, talk about it, he always talks about how when they came in to Nevada, most people knew them as a California winery. Which of course they are. So he was all about just getting people to know what William Hill was and what business they were in. And so for him, it was about hand-to-hand combat and having an area in the venue, in the arena, where fans would walk by, see some TVs, see a bar, walk in, and somebody in a William Hill shirt could come over and say, "Hey, do you know how to bet? Do you have an account? Let us help you set one up." 3 really, really different things. And over the course of that night, watching the 3 of them and spending time with people from all those brands and seeing the way they used it, a bell went off for me. A light bulb moment, however you want to look at it. And that, for me, you think about, so best practice, place to look, I always turn back to them. Even though others are doing it and doing it well, I think about what they did right from the beginning.
Yeah, and I remember reading one of your articles not too long ago, but the Devils were predicting that it could be a $2 to $5 million a year category. So that was your article. But when I think of categories getting to that level, it's like it's going to eclipse the beer and the soft drink category when you really look at the total investment in the category.
This is probably a better question for somebody else, but especially I would say in the early days. Right now those sports books are vying for market share. Even though it's a low margin business, they are spending a ton of money to get not as much money. So that's the environment now. Over time, I don't know whether that continues to be the case, but certainly that's the environment now.
Right. Sarah, same question for you. You're around it on a daily basis, but any best practices that you might share with a team that's looking to get into the space with a new sponsorship agreement?
Yeah, I think what Bill said is really important, which is know your audience, know your customer, understand their business model and their needs and wants. And, I think the point that Bill was underscoring is that every single one of these companies has a different business model. So Mgm Resorts is a international resorts company with multiple properties throughout Las Vegas and throughout the country. And sports betting is a very, very tiny piece of their business. Now, they all want to grow and they all want to move into a new sector that is obviously going to do gangbusters, not just from the sports betting side, but definitely for online casino. But they all have a different strategy. William Hill is another great example. They are, and we'll say, they're retail first. So they are very focused on sports books from a retail perspective, not necessarily their mobile platform. FanDuel and DraftKings, very different. They don't have resort properties. They are doing market access deals. They have done market access deals with Boyd Gaming and some other big US operators, but their bread and butter is not the resort casino. It is their mobile platform. So I think that that is critical. And here's the thing too, is not just knowing where they're coming from and knowing your customer, it's knowing that it's changing. Like I just see it now in a lot of the leagues and the teams that I work with, and the operators' response now when we're going out to bid on some things is, like I said, what got us here isn't going to get us to the next place. They're not necessarily interested in what we were doing in the past. And I think, to Bill's point, this money is going to get more and more finite, and it's going to be much more scalpel focused than it is big national, splashy buys. So that would be my advice to any team that's looking to go out to market is, just really understanding each one of these companies' motives.
Okay, and it's been mentioned at least once, but I'm going to go back to Steve. How important will exclusivity be in this category? It didn't seem like early on that a lot of what I was hearing is seeing is like, don't go exclusive. I mean, there was such a high demand to get in, and they have different business models. But, Steve, you go back to your time with soccer in Vegas, I'm guessing that deal was big enough to be exclusive or not?
Our William Hill deal was exclusive. We were in a situation where we could put William Hill odds within our television broadcast, within the state of Nevada, within our stadium. We were able to have William Hill location or individuals at the stadium to talk to people about the William Hill app, and it was very important for them that they were the only sports betting company involved with soccer as we built the market for soccer. That being said, I don't think your better analogy was the beer industry, where Anheuser-Busch, King of Beers, would love to have exclusivity in every stadium in America. They have seen the teams sort of chip away at that exclusivity. Well, we're going to have a separate import beer. We're going to have a separate craft beer. We're going to have a separate, hard cider, seltzer, et cetera. I am certain that in an ideal world, William Hill, FanDuel, DraftKings, et cetera, will almost demand exclusive relationships. Sports teams, I imagine, will not provide that unless it's really, really, really significant money.
And Sarah, go back to the exclusivity scenario with the leagues. I think leagues are going to try to avoid going exclusive at all costs, are they not?
Yeah, I mean, so here's the thing. I think that the operators are starting to put more pressure on the teams and the leagues for exclusive either opportunities, or they really do want the categories limited. I think that the Devils is probably going to end up being somewhat of an anomaly. I just don't think that the operators are going to do multi deals, maybe one or two, but I just don't see more than that, quite frankly. And, when you take a step back and you're looking at it from a league or a team perspective, I sort of have noticed two things emerging. One, if you're one of the big four and you already have betting that's taking place on your sport, you don't really have to go out and create a sports betting market. But if you're not in one of those, which then exclusivity, it can become a little bit more of a reality. If you are PLL, Premier Lacrosse League is one of my clients, you are essentially now creating a sports betting market where there wasn't one in the past. You want every operator out there to carry your lines. You may do an exclusive marketing deal, but you really want everyone to carry your lines, to promote betting on your sport, because it just isn't there. So there's a little bit of nuance in all of it. And, I do notice this sort of second tier sports, although that some of them are amazing and perfect for sports betting, like golf or tennis, and golf is doing gangbusters right now. They have a different sort of strategic approach versus maybe, basketball or football, that there already is a huge market in place and they can probably demand more for their assets.
Okay.
If I can jump in on that, Jim, I thought it was fascinating that the Professional Bowlers Association, when they came back amidst the COVID timeframe, put betting opportunities exclusively on Fox Bet, while their bowling tournament was being televised exclusively on the Fox networks, which I thought created all sorts of potential conflicts of interest. But I don't see that as a way to broaden the interest and appeal of PBA by putting unique betting opportunities only on one platform that also happens to be the broadcaster. We're going to see the landscape about how operators, media companies, and properties work together moving forward. And I think everyone could be very different. There's a question in the Q&A about the Barstool Penn National Gaming partnership, and that's a great example of a content company. And Barstool is now in the sports betting business, and we're all looking forward to see how that really plays out across the country where they've got a license.
Right. Bill, anything to add on exclusivity and any trends that you see going on?
Not so much on exclusivity. I do think Barstool is interesting because if you look at the success of the two DFS brands, this is a little bit like that, and it is in partnership with an established gaming company that understands regulation and has licenses and has a footprint and has a lot of positives and didn't have a brand. And Barstool in that in that segment is a really strong brand. And so what is that? Does that cut in to FanDuel? Does it cut into DraftKings? Does it cut into both? What does that mean? And oh, by the way, is that one of those situations where you may see them be able to sort of push some people into some sports like NASCAR, for example, that's trying to develop a betting product. Those are all interesting to me.
Cool. Bill, I want to stay with you for a second, but from a best practice standpoint, what are you seeing with fan engagement, where teams and properties are thinking both inside and outside the arenas and stadiums that they play in? I think back to my days with the Cavs, and I think you could make a game a lot more interesting for the people in the arena if you could be open in promoting spreads and halftime challenges. So what are you seeing there from a fan engagement standpoint?
I think one thing everybody's trying to figure out where the line is. This MLB season is going to be interesting because you will see in markets where betting is legal, you will see teams start to introduce either a 5-minute spot before the game talking about lines, or a couple of spots, a couple of commercial spots within the game. And oh, by the way, it's not the way the rules are written. It's not just if you're in a state, if your television market extends to that state. So the Mets and the Yankees, for example, will be able to start doing some sports betting marketing because of their footprint stretching into New Jersey. So I think that when you think about engagement, in order to engage people in something, you have to acknowledge that it exists. And all the properties are trying to figure out where that is. I mean, another good example of that is, as some of these deals come out in a big splash, and they want to talk to me, and others are done kind of quietly. And in baseball, part of that quietness is because as soon as you announce that deal, you do have fans that come out and say, well, what about Pete Rose? There are still some things that the industry has to get comfortable with. And I don't think, if you think about, the NBA really, you didn't see a lot. You didn't see teams do a lot. You saw some pretty tight restrictions. You saw the NHL take a much more open approach. But it's all really early stages. We haven't had that many pro teams in markets that did have sports betting. This is the year where we're going to start to see that, and I think a lot of things will emerge. And that gets back to your question of engagement. Is this – you're going to have to prove to me that people are necessarily going to watch en masse, watch a lot more as a result of this. I think some people will. But we'll see what it really does in terms of engagement. I think what it does do is drive business for the sports books.
Okay, Sarah, I want to stay in this area of fan engagement as teams and properties figure out where they stand. What role, if any, will they have with public service announcements on the dangers of sports gambling? Because it doesn't come without dangers in the groups that will argue about addiction and some of the unfortunate things that can happen with sports gambling.
Yeah, I mean, this was one of the issues when I was at the American Gaming Association, which was the national trade group that represents the commercial, tribal, and supplier community. And, you know, what we saw around the world was, and we continue to see, is a backlash of regulation for, quite frankly, just totally over the top, oversaturated marketing for sportsbook and betting. And we had a little bit of that here back in 2016 with daily fantasy sports when FanDuel and DraftKings, or maybe it was 2015, went toe to toe, and every other ad was one of those ads. And so we saw a huge regulatory backlash. And I think, you know, one of the things that we really tried to do as an industry was confront and get in front of some of these issues so that we didn't feel the pain on the back end of it. And, you know, responsible gaming has always been, I think, one of the biggest Achilles heels, quite frankly, for the industry. And now that we have a national stage, we, from an industry perspective, have moved largely from a retail casino brick and mortar opportunity now to a mobile opportunity, more advertising, more mainstream advertising, certainly. You know, we have to temper that with some restraint, and secondarily with some messaging then around responsible gaming and how if you do have a problem, you can seek help. So, you know, I think the greatest thing, quite frankly, for the operators in the US is that we do have centralized leagues that are largely dictating the advertising rules for the casino operators. And I would say have shown a lot of restraint thus far. You know, I think it's great that MLB has revised their rules. It's now going to allow more advertising during the game, but they are not going overboard with the whole thing. And I don't anticipate that's going to happen. I think the same thing with the other leagues. I think that they are going to practice a lot of restraint in that. So you don't quite have that same model around the world. And so I think that does actually end up helping us here in the US.
Okay. I'm going to throw this one to Steve because UNLV is right over your shoulder there. But where do you see sports gambling sponsorship going in the college space? I think that COVID-19 is going to put some additional pressure for more revenues. And obviously, this is a new revenue stream. But what's your vision on when UNLV might be able to really, I know they got a major gift from Boyd Gaming not too long ago, but I'm talking about just a flat out sponsorship in the collegiate space. What's your vision there?
Well, we feel like the NCAA policy on betting, which is basically summed up as don't bet on it, hasn't really been revised or updated in nearly 2 decades. And for, you know, for that time, for 20 years, basically, NCAA athletic administrators have been told not to bet, don't go in a sports book, don't do Super Bowl pools, have nothing to do with any form of wagering. And all of a sudden, in 2 years, we've got 20 jurisdictions that have legal sports gambling, and the landscape is changing so quickly that we don't know that the NCAA or any conference or individual schools really are adapting fast enough. And college athletics certainly has enough going on with name, image, likeness, and various other issues right now. We thought this was going to be the primary issue that NCAA athletic departments would be addressing in 2020. It's been dropped to back burner spot number 6, I think, right now, but it will come back. But I just go back to a lifetime ago, March. We're at various NCAA basketball conference tournaments here in Las Vegas, in some cases happening inside arenas that are on casino properties. You can walk through the stands watching people placing bets on college athletics on their phones, in real time. And there's just too much money at stake for the Mountain West Conference, the Pac-12 Conference, or UNLV not to access some of the revenue that sports betting offers. And, the NCAA is conservative by nature, but I think that individual schools and the revenue that comes from football and basketball programs primarily is eventually going to push us to the fact that if it's legal in our state and if there are certain protections to protect underage college students and college athletes from getting involved, that I think that college sports will see sports betting sponsorships sooner than later.
Bill, your thoughts on the collegiate space when it comes to sponsorships and sports gambling?
I think it will be a very low. It's going to be like everything here. It's really going to be local and regional. I think it's going to have a lot to do. I think the NCAA will inevitably relax its restrictions, and then I think it's going to be very much a university by university. I liken it a little bit to the way schools have looked at their relationship with alcohol. And those vary. They are all over the board. And some of that is based on whether it's an on-campus arena, but a lot of it is just based on the culture of that university and where they are and what they're comfortable with. And so I think that I think sports betting sort of plays out that way because there's no doubt at all the sports books would like to play in that space, especially when you consider. You look at the way the map has rolled out so far, and this will change over time. But there's a lot of states where sports betting is legal, where the college properties where there are no, professional properties to speak of, and a ton of wagering is going on in college sports. I mean, in West Virginia, there's an awful lot of wagering on college sports. In Mississippi, there's an awful lot of wagering in college sports. Mississippi is only in the casino, right? They don't have mobile wagering, so the numbers are a lot smaller. But still, the activity is there, and that is an attractive. That's right in the demo, for the sports books in many ways. So I think the biggest thing out there is the NFL, and the second biggest thing out there is college football. So I just think it's inevitable that that the money doesn't somehow at some point become attractive enough that you will see schools that get comfortable with it.
Cool. Sarah, any thoughts on college athletics?
Ooh, it's a tough one. I think, I feel like every state, there's no doubt that the political power of the local university is incredibly strong and compelling. So many states that will go forward and legalize sports betting, but yet they'll carve out betting on their local universities, which is completely counterintuitive, quite frankly. I mean, if we're talking about integrity, you should absolutely have your local universities included in a legal sports betting program, because otherwise all it does is just fuel the black market. From a sponsorship perspective, I do think that obviously it gets a little bit, it gets trickier. I mean, I just think that there is definitely a concern, certainly from the industry's perspective as well, on targeting any underage potential gamblers. So I think that there's a way to do it, but I do think that, it has to be very thoughtful and very careful, and there's no real silver bullet. And I do think that Nevada is probably the best example of how that can happen with UNLV and UNR and how they've thread that needle successfully with operators.
Cool. All right, one last quick hitting question, and then we're going to open it up to our audience. But real quick, what's the one sport you feel will benefit the most with more and more states legalizing sports gambling? So what's the sport that's going to really benefit the most? We'll start with Sarah.
I mean, there are a couple. Look, right now, who knows, just given COVID, it could be last man standing, quite frankly. I mean, if you had asked me a year ago whether or not I thought Russian table tennis was going to be a sport that people would be betting on, I would have laughed you out of the room. But given our current situation, they have been doing unbelievably well. UFC is another one category that's been doing incredibly well. I think that golf is just such a natural sport for betting. I think that the Tiger Mickelson part 2 thing a couple months ago with DraftKings, I think that was the largest handle that DraftKings had ever had on golf. So I think that's a sport that's going to continue to thrive. I do think that NASCAR is very well positioned as well to take advantage of this. So I think there's going to be some really interesting sort of sleeper categories that no one envisioned, including Russian table tennis.
There you go. Bill, I'm going to pin you down, though. Only one sport. If somebody came to you and said, all right, Bill, you follow this as close as anyone. What's the one sport that will probably benefit the most?
And it has to be different than mine.
Now this is the problem, because she had it right.
Yeah.
It's golf. It's golf. It is golf, okay, because they're creating a product. And because the digital market that didn't exist before. So like when golf betting was who's going to win this tournament, and that morning I get up and I place my bet, or actually probably the night before because tee times are so early, I place my bet and then I wait until the next night to see whether I won or not. That's not a great product. Not for today's gambling audience. Sarah's point on ping pong is absolutely, she likes to call it table tennis. I like to call it ping pong. But Sarah's point on ping pong is absolutely right. I mean, the table tennis betting in Colorado was like 6 times bigger than anything else in the month of May. 6 times bigger than anything else. Now that's because it was an empty landscape, but it's also because what it is, it's lots and lots of opportunities. It's point after point, match after match, all day. And think about a golf tournament. It's player after player, hole after hole, shot after shot. Every one of those is an individual opportunity to bet. What will be the outcome on this next shot by any of these players all out on the course at the same time? The volume is immense. It goes on for 4 days. Oh, by the way, they are wholeheartedly behind supporting it and embracing it. They have ShotLink technology that will now allow them to make money off of it because they're the only ones. I can sit and watch, and if I want to run my own little operation, I could sit at home and say, that guy made this shot, he didn't make that shot. I don't know what's going on a golf course without ShotLink. So for all those reasons, to me, they are the sleeping giant here. I mean, tennis is huge globally as a betting property. Golf will be, I don't know if it'll be bigger than tennis, but it's going to be big.
Okay, Steve, for you on this question, what can it do for soccer? Because I know you've spent.
You knew I was going to say that.
Yeah.
When I started at Major League Soccer, there were 12 teams. There's now 26. USL is up to 35 teams across the country in the championship, and there's another 15 in League One. I think the opportunity for soccer is not unlike what we're seeing in the NFL with the $1 million super contest that Superbook popularized here in Las Vegas. They're taking it to Colorado. The new Circa Sports book is also going to match it with $1 million prediction contest in football. I think the passion that soccer fans have, both for domestic soccer, but also European soccer, South American soccer, et cetera, that there'll be incredible growth. But I can't disagree with anything that Sarah or Bill says. I think that ultimately in-game wagering is going to drive all sports wagering. And if you're a sport and you're active in the space, that it just does drive engagement and interest. And kudos to the person who said in the chat that what about cornhole? If table tennis can become a phenomenon, why not cornhole?
Yeah, and I think there was a question too about esports. I am so skeptical about it. There's a lot of chatter about it during the height of COVID and everything being shut down, and this was going to be esports moment. The challenges with esports are from a regulatory perspective and from a pricing perspective and a minor perspective. It's hard enough to get regulators and legislators to want to legalize sports betting, taking it a step further to wanting to legalize and accept, and I know some states have, New Jersey and Nevada, bets on esports, just even more challenging. And then regulatory sort of piece of that from a league standpoint, who's making sure that integrity of the game is being upheld and that someone's not accidentally slipping their thumb and missing something or losing a skin. I'm trying to keep up with my kids here. I think it's just a really tough sport to whet the appetite of operators to want to take risk on something that just is a really hard thing to make sure that integrity is being upheld. So I'm not very bullish on esports from a betting perspective. And I'm sure a lot of people are not going to be happy, especially in this audience, with that answer, but that's my take.
Yeah, I would agree.
First question from our audience, and Bill, I'm going to come to you because you are a Florida Gator, but a lot of the southern states have been slow to legalize sports betting thus far. And this person references South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. Is there a specific reason for that?
I look, it's easy to look at it and say this is a social thing and it's the conservative South. For me, a lot of it sort of goes the way that gaming does in an individual state. And so I think those where there is either an existing, a strong casino presence, or might be more likely to move a little more quickly. By the way, I'm not so sure that if you look at it for national, it's a border thing, right? So it's almost where it just takes starting, and so as you see more, I think, states that are sort of conjoined, you'll see it spread more. I don't think there's any magic reason, to be honest. I think it's politics. I think it's timing. I mean, this is much more in Sarah's wheelhouse in that regard. But if you look at what happened with the district, and then Maryland, and then Virginia, and opposition tends to fall in dominoes that go border by border by border. In New York, at some point they just absolutely get sick of watching all this money flooding in New Jersey. So that has to happen a little more in the South, and I don't think we've gotten there yet. But I'll tell you what, Georgia manages to get across the line at some point. I think a lot changes.
Sarah, let's flip to you. What states are in the queue next, and can you give us a little bit of insight on Ohio?
I was just going to say Ohio, I think is definitely going to be in the queue this year for passing legislation, and then it'll take some time to actually implement regs. But they already have gaming in the state, so I would expect by next year, 2021, you'll have legalized sports betting in Ohio. Bill is right. I mean, in the southeast corridor, it's a little bit tougher. There does truly still tend to be some conservativeness around gambling. Although I think Tennessee was a great example. It was on no one's radar screen. They don't have casino gaming. They do have a lottery, and yet now they're going to have legalized sports betting from a mobile perspective. So really interesting there. But it is truly that pressure on a state-by-state basis. When it's the FOMO, they're missing out on revenue and people driving across the border and spending their money there, and they have to compete and keep the money in the state. And so it will put pressure on the other states, and you can already see that happening in pockets definitely in the Northeast corridor, Mid-Atlantic. And, I think we just need to see one of those Southeast states move forward. I think people were real surprised that Louisiana, they did finally pass legislation. It's going to be now up to a local parish referendum to enact sports betting. But, it's been a lot longer, I think, than most anticipated. Mississippi is extremely limited right now. Texas has always been a juggernaut. And then you get into some of those other states that are predominantly ruled by the tribes. So Oklahoma is a good example of that. There's been a lot of back and forth on that, whether legality and how that state's going to move forward. So they all are met with complexities. Look, we're at, I think, 22 states now, which is insane, with legalized sports betting. And I think that we're going to continue to see that fall. And once we get to those big brass rings of Texas and Florida and California, I mean, we're I think it's we're pretty much done. New York, another one.
Right. Sarah, I'm going to stick with you, but good question. Can a college obtain a license?
I saw that one come through. I think it would be, it's a good question. Never say never, I guess. I think the politics, I think it's hard enough, especially when I get back to that minor piece of the equation and having a legal sports book on site. So the whole notion of a team getting a license is twofold. One, they could get a retail operation within their arena or stadium so that they have 365 traffic happening all the time, not just when the games are occurring. And then secondarily is that mobile piece where they would be able to go, partner with a sportsbook operator and get some sort of revenue share. I think that it's a little bit harder than with a university, again, just given the minor perspective and having a legal casino on site on a college campus. I think that's a pretty high bar to cross.
Bill, I want to come to you on this one. Similar to golf and the number of potential bets, what's your opinion of where MLB can go with sports gambling? You're the commissioner of MLB. How do you use it to really, amplify your fan base and your interest in the game?
In play, absolutely. I think has a lot of potential in baseball. I think that's a matter of if you just think about the fan base and then the betting public. So the betting public understands opportunities to bet in football. They understand opportunities to bet in basketball. I don't know how well they understand opportunities to bet in baseball. I don't know the level of awareness beyond the hardcore bettor that I can go in and inning by inning, bet on whether a run will be scored, for example. And that's the likely path of growth, I think, for baseball for in-play. Now, MLB thinks there's a lot of potential in much more sort of micro betting around individual events around pitches and longest home run hit and a lot of stuff that sort of exotics that they want to create that they can then parse out as having value that you can't get anywhere else. I think that's a tougher road ahead. But there's no doubt that this season, this will be the first season, just because of the way the sports calendar worked out, really last fall, as so many sports were getting ramped up, as so many, states were getting ramped up with mobile betting, baseball season was ending. And so this was to be the first season where you would have, a lot of states and much more mobile wagering and a league that has done a bunch of deals. And MLB has now done a bunch of deals with operators. So their content will be out there, and it'll just be a matter of seeing how the betting public reacts. There's no doubt it's growing, but it's still small.
Sarah, this one's for you. It's really coming from Steve, but was out there in the audience. But you're doing a lot of consulting in this space. Is the knowledge base where it needs to be with sports business executives on what they need to know about sports gambling?
Yeah, look, I think everyone is trying to figure it out. So am I. I mean, it's a new thing in the US. I think that the part that becomes a little bit trickier is certainly the connections with the industry and who does what and what does it mean. And then I think, starting off the conversation, we were talking about just knowing your customer and each one of these operators and what their objectives are. I think the second piece that just gets a little bit tricky and confusing is the regulatory piece. And I think people are really surprised to find out how highly regulated the casino gaming industry is, and what that means and how policy impacts their business opportunities. And so it's tough, but I feel like I speak to a lot of people who really in earnest are doing the best they can. I know that they can participate in the course as well that OU's offering online, which I think is great, is a great resource to beef up your skills and learn a little bit more about the industry. So it's complicated, but I know in earnest folks are trying to understand it and take advantage of it.
Okay, I'm going to end this webinar with a quick question for just Sarah and Bill, because Steve and I will be huddling up on the side. But if we're to do future webinars on the topic of sports gambling, what what are the hot topics in other parts of this vertical that we should address? Bill, we'll start with you. We're going to have another webinar on sports gambling. Where should we go? Sponsorship was an obvious one for me, given my background, but what's another hot topic that maybe some of our students and future students would be interested in learning?
I think, we just started talking about, I think the evolution of the product itself is really interesting, because again, what most people thought of as sports betting is not what this is about. If it were, there would not be money in it for the sports industry. And that's why you didn't see it for so long. I mean, when this was about somebody coming in and making a bet before a game and then going home and watching a game and then coming back, there wasn't a lot of opportunity there for sports to find any revenue out of that. There's a lot more when you think about in play and so I think that if almost a look ahead to what this product really looks like and where the opportunities are around that product, I'm sort of spitballing here. So talk to me tomorrow. I might change my mind, but off the top of my head, that might be it.
Sarah, hot topic that we might want to address in one of these future webinars.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think for probably audience that's tuned in right now, I love the new perspective and fresh ideas and new blood that's entering the casino space. It's a new frontier, quite frankly. I've been in it, I think you mentioned in the beginning, I think I'm up to maybe 14 years now, and worked for MGM, and I lived in Las Vegas. And so I've seen all sides of it. And the new platform piece is the mobile. I mean, that just, like I said, that did not exist in the past in the US for this industry. And so I think we're seeing advancements now, certainly around payment processing. But once you sort of dig into how incredibly complicated and convoluted the regulations are and how much that impacts customer acceptance and KYC and actually, getting customers through in a smooth way, I think there's a lot that can be solved for. So I think the innovation piece is really fascinating. And as Bill said, this is not, I don't think it's what everyone thought it was going to end up being, or it's not what they were familiar with. And so I think that's a great area of opportunity, and certainly a good discussion moving forward.
Okay. Well, hey, I want to thank all three of you for taking time out to be with us today as we get this webinar series going. And if we can ever be of assistance with anything at Ohio University, just let us know. Scott, I'll throw it back to you.
Great. Thank you, guys. Thanks to all of our panelists today. Thank you so much. Also, I want to plug to all of our students that are currently on this webinar. A lot of you have submitted questions to our instructors, and we had aggregated those questions from some of our very first students. And we're putting together our next webinar. That'll be Wednesday, August 12th, at the same time, 2 p.m. Eastern. Again, Wednesday, August 12th. That'll be the very next Q&A session for all of our students that have submitted questions through our course. Guys, don't forget, we are offering a special discount to all of our attendees. Today, that's Web 715. That's 715 for 25% off any course or course bundle. Guys, thanks guys so much. Check out sportsgamblingeducation.com. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.